Hi, this is Kevin Tully.
I'm Chad Hill from Highway Chassis and Cycle in Addison, Illinois.
So tell us a little bit about the GTO-R project.
The GTO-R project came about with a guy named Josh Russell calling us. He had seen our work on the internet and liked what he saw, visited the shop a few times, and he knew that we built race cars as well and liked the quality of what we did on the hot rods. So he came to Chad and I with the idea to build a car that harkened back to the Trans Am days of racing when Raybestos was heavily involved in that in the 60s.
So one car that we really wanted to take inspiration from was Herb Adams' Grey Ghost. It was a 64 Tempest that he raced and really dominated the series. There were a lot of styling cues in that we really liked. You know, the stance, the look and the feel. We incorporated the two fuel filler necks on either side of the car. The multicolored headlights was something that we incorporated. So we really wanted it to look vintage and historic, but underneath it's all a modern race car.
How long did it take you to research this car and the history of it and just the general feeling of capturing that decade's spirit of the 60s?
Probably took about a month or so of really scouring the internet for road racing cars and finding all the pictures of the Grey Ghost that we could find. Oftentimes we'd find the same picture over and over on a certain site, and you know, we had to look really hard for a picture of the other side of the car so we knew what it looked like there. And you know, we studied some of the NASCAR cars from the era, see how they kind of looked, get a feel for some of the graphics so we knew where we could take ours. And from there I probably had a couple weeks to get to the final rendering, you know, so we could start showing to people, show to the folks at Raybestos, that we show them what we wanted to do and what we were going to build them, and so we could get their approval and move ahead. From there we went to the SEMA show in Las Vegas and started talking to different potential build partners to try and get them on board, because the car is going to get a lot of exposure, and you know, a lot of the build partners were really excited about the potential of, you know, promoting their own brand within our build. So after we came back from SEMA in November, we started looking for a car. By December we had a car, and by January we were tearing into it.
How difficult was it to find the donor car?
Surprisingly easy. Since the car was going to be a road race car, we wanted to have a post, or a car with a B-pillar in it. Back then that was the car to use, and even today, because they have more strength in the body. And there's a little bit of a learning curve too. I mean, most people know GTOs to be a hardtop car with no B-pillar, and we discovered that the majority of the GTOs in 64 were post cars, so we just needed to look for a 64 GTO, and a lot of the ones we originally found were quite a ways away. We were pretty lucky we found this one just north of Milwaukee, so it was a fairly short trip to go pick it up, and the car was actually in really good shape when we got it. We ended up having to replace the quarter panels, but other than that, the car was in really nice condition.
It was a basket case, and it was all in boxes, and the interior was totally gutted, the doors were off, the deck lid was off, no front end. It was raw material to start from, which was perfect for us.
What was the hardest part of the build for you?
The hardest?
The most challenging?
Challenging is a better question. Probably integrating the front brakes, the suspension, and the front end had to be pretty much designed around the giant NASCAR brakes that are in the front. So that was a lot of what fits what, and telephone calls and research and calculator work.
Obviously the GTO is an outstanding vehicle just on its own, but the graphics really bring it to life. Tell me a little bit of how you approach that.
Well, we knew we wanted to have a vintage road racing look to it. So, back in the old days when the cars were racing, they had the sponsor logo big all down the quarter panel. So that's what we did. I took the Raybestos logo from the 50s because they have a more modern version of it now that they use. We pulled that logo out. I redrew it up. They wanted to see a racing version of that with brake and chassis. So I took the wings from the front of the R, flipped them around, brought them down, and incorporated that into one logo type. And that became the branding for the car. The 11, we knew we wanted to have a number on the car because it's a race car. Race cars have numbers. So we picked the 11 because it's the 2011 Raybestos build for the giveaway car. And the 11 was an obvious choice for us because on a scale of 1 to 10, the GTO goes to 11. And then some other things we did with the GTO-R logo, we took because it's a race car, we wanted to take the GTO logo and kind of modernize it a little bit, make it a little beefier, and then I incorporated the modern flying R from Raybestos for the R in racing. So that was another little nod to the brand that we threw in there. And like any good race car, you want to scare the competition, so we've got big letters on the hood, 700 horsepower, look out. And that's kind of it. We incorporated the Hurst shifter on the Hurst logo on the back, because Kevin loves Hurst.
And they came with that. If you bought a 64 GTO and it came with a Hurst shifter in 64.
Tell me a little bit about the interior of the car. And who built it? Did it come that way? How much mods did it require?
The interior of the car, for the most part, the interior of the car is stock GTO. Legendary Auto Upholstery helped us with all the upholstery stuff. And the goal on the inside of the car was to make it look as if Pontiac had decided to take the new GTO and go road racing with it as a factory. So if anybody knows or has seen one of the factory race cars from any of the big three or their subsidiaries in the 60s, a lot of times it would have something in it that was exactly like the production part, with the exception of like say the door panels on our GTO. There's no holes there for a window crank or for an armrest. So a lot of those kind of things got eliminated from a production-based but factory-built race car in that era. So Legendary Auto Upholstery was nice enough to make us the side panels in the back, where they would normally not be upholstered all the way to the floor where the back seat was. There's no back seat now, so they made the whole panel appear as though it was from the factory. They just didn't put the hole in for the window crank or the armrest. And the same with the door panels. The seats that are in it are in fact the seats that came out of that car. They're the 1964 Pontiac GTO seats that came in that exact car. Legendary took those, and because we're road racing with it, I asked them if they could upholster the seat as if it was factory and make it look like the factory seat when no one was sitting in it. But when you sit down in the seat, the side bolsters are, I think, an inch or an inch and a half taller than they would be from the factory. It's kind of cool because if you look in the car with nobody sitting in it, the seats look stock. Mm-hmm. But when you sit down, suddenly there's these bolsters there that keep you in place when you're road racing it. The dash is made so that it looks like the original Pontiac dash. We had to move the ignition switch. One of the neat things on the GTO is that because Pontiac was wanting to get people in the United States excited about road racing, and it was big in Europe. Some of the race cars in Europe, the ignition key is worked with the left hand because the cars have to start the race off. So the drivers would have the clutch in, their hand on the shifter, and they'd start the car with their right hand or left hand and then be able to grab the steering wheel and just go. So the GTO was actually made that way. We had to move it because of the roll cage, but it's still over there. Racers in the 60s, lots of them would just take the original instrument panel out of the car, the whole thing, and then put a piece of aluminum in its place and fill it with Stewart Warner gauges. we wanted to do the same thing, but we didn't want to lose that deep dash feel of the GTO for the instrument panel. So I took the stock one and cut out the original face of the instrument panel and replaced it with a engine turned aluminum panel, and then filled it with Stewart Warner gauges and indicator lights. And they all function, they all serve a function. And it's designed as if a race car dash would have been. You know, the two gauges that are in front of you are oil pressure and tach, rather than like tach and speedo. And then the gauges go away from you in both directions, you know, based on their importance to the information you're getting from them if you're racing. The next gauge over on the right is the water temperature gauge, and so on and so forth. We use the stock steering column. It's got a wheel on it that's new, the steering wheel on it that's new. It's from Giuliano's, but it looks like a Superior 500 wheel that would have been available at the time. So we used that to try and keep the feel of the car, that early race car feel.
So tell me about the scale model in your hands.
This is a 1/18 scale die-cast model of the GTO-R, and one of the cool things about this build is Josh and I were discussing ways for the promotion to have a little something extra for the salespeople out at the stores, so they can carry the sales kits and let people know that they can win this car. So one of the giveaways with that was this die-cast GTO here. We were lucky that Sunstar already had the production models of the 64 GTO in-house, so it was just a matter of trying to make their car look like our car. They got fairly close. There were some things that they couldn't reproduce because of budgetary reasons to match our GTO, but overall I think it looks pretty good, and so far people have really been excited about it. It's a neat little thing that, you know, who would have ever thought we'd have a die-cast car from a car that we built. That's pretty awesome. All gearheads collect cars, and we won't get to keep the real one, but we're going to have this one sitting on our shelf for a long time.